Hey, what's up? Thanks so much for being a listener to the All In podcast. We want to let you know a new feature we are really excited about over here at our team is you can actually send in voice messages for a chance to be included on the podcast. We want to start new segments that allow you guys to share your thoughts on what's going on in the indie sports and culture scene. So if you actually go to the description page in our podcast for any of our episodes, you'll see a link at the bottom that says send in a voice message, and you can send in your own very own quick, short voice message. Please don't be long. That's annoying. About what you think about the pod and what you want to share in your sports take. So be sure to do that for a chance to be included on future episodes. And I cannot wait to hear some of your voices. So now let's get to the podcast. All right, heading on week 2 of the All In podcast. Welcome back. Welcome to some of you who have not been with us before. We're excited to have you. Thanks for listening. Got a loaded show today. Lots to talk about. We're going to go through our cold open, which is something I'm really excited about because it's a topic in college football no one is talking about right now that I think needs to be talked about and needs to be discussed because it's an important subject that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. And then we get into an in-depth conversation about the state of the Big Ten Conference, where Indiana and Purdue lay in the conference and where they're going and how they could finish up the seasons after an exciting week 1 of matchups. So this is the All In Podcast. We're getting started right now. All right, so starting with the cold open, there are 2 goals when I do these cold opens. I want to talk about something that applies to the Indiana area, Indiana sports fans, Indiana culture, something that matters and something that affects Indiana. I don't want to talk about issues that affect California sports because that's not something you guys care about. So one, I want to make sure it affects you at home as the listener. If you're an Indy sports fan, if you're an Indy sports fan listening to this podcast, I want to be sure you are able to relate to it and understand it. But then there's a second aspect of that. The second aspect being, I want to be unique in the sense, if you're listening to this podcast, I want to give you a take that maybe no one else has, or maybe give you something that no one else is talking about. And frankly, I think I've listened to 10 different college football in general, podcasts, TikToks, I mean, TV shows, sportscasters, sports radio shows this week. All of them have touched on areas around this, but none of them have touched the actual thing that I saw on Saturday. And people have asked me all week, what are your college football takes? What did you think this week? What did you think of IU versus Ohio State? What did you think of Purdue's loss to Fresno State? What did you think of Notre Dame looking like they finally have a quarterback? But what did you think of Colorado, by the way, which is just one of the most insane sports stories I think we've ever had, and certainly one of the most insane sports stories that we've seen in a while. What Deion Sanders is doing at a Pac-12 program, what he just did to the reigning national title champs, or runner-up, I should say. And listen, I think what we're not talking about is the fact that TCU lost 30 players off that roster, but still an impressive win nonetheless for somebody whose team went 1-11, added 51 transfers. What I want to talk about today is look at the biggest players of the weekend. Look at the players who really did well this weekend, okay? Go down the list. And these are – I want to run through with you. If you're a better person – I dabble in it sometimes. I'm not very good at it, as anyone would tell you who knows my betting habits. But if you go look at the top 10 Heisman bets right now, the best odds to win the Heisman, top 10. Let me run through them with you, okay? Plus 450. Best odds to win the Heisman is Caleb Williams out of USC. He started his career at Oklahoma and then transferred to USC. Second place, Jordan Travis, plus 750. Florida State quarterback. He's been at Florida State for a minute, but he didn't start there. He started at Louisville. Third place, Michael Penix, plus 850. He started IU, Indiana, right here, before transferring to Washington. Fourth place is J.J. McCarthy. He's been at University of Michigan his entire career in college. Fifth place is Drew Aller, Penn State. Been there. Sixth place is Bo Nix. Starts at Auburn and then moves on to Oregon. Seventh place is Quinn Ewers, OSU, and then Texas. Eighth place is Sam Hartman, Wake Forest, Notre Dame. Ninth place, Drake May, who's been at UNC forever. And 10th place, Jalen Milroe at Alabama. And I think the other things you could put in there, Jaden Daniels would probably be up there had LSU won that game. He started his career at Arizona State. Travis Hunter, Shadur Sanders, both started at Jackson State before transferring to Colorado. What is my point in saying this? I'm saying this because I think what you are about to see in college football is very rarely are you going to see a Heisman candidate. Very rarely are you going to see an first team All-American candidate who played the entirety of their collegiate career at one program. Let's look at Colorado for a second, since everyone in the country wants to look at Colorado this week, right? Colorado had 51 transfers come into their program this past season. 51 transfers. The second closest program, Arizona State, with 31. So Colorado had 20 more transfers than the second most changing team. I get it. That's what happens. You got to coach. Of that 51, 43 are at least 3 stars. 43 3 stars. At a program that went 1-11 last year. Think about that for a second. And then the others are, you got Travis Hunter, who's arguably one of the best college football athletes we've seen in, when's the last time you've seen a player play both ways for the entire 89% of the game, I think was the stat. Crazy numbers. Locally, let's take that focus, like we said earlier. Indiana, look at their loss to Ohio State, okay? Shock the world by losing by 20 to Ohio State. I don't know if it's shock the world, but let's not lie. Indiana looked better than Indiana was expecting to look against Ohio State. And the best part of that IU football loss, if you looked at it, was the defense. On that defense, Andre Carter, Jameer Johnson, Jacob Magnum Farmer, Kobe Minor, all transfers who were not a part of this Indiana University program a year ago. Hell, 2 of the 3 leading tacklers in that game were not a member of the Indiana University program. Oh, you're not an IU fan? How about Purdue? Starting quarterback, arguably your best player for Purdue that day, Hudson Card, opened the game on an 84-yard touchdown pass on his first drive as a Purdue Boilermaker. Finished 17-30, 254, and 2 touchdowns. So, Griffin, why are you telling me this? Okay, we get it. There's a lot of transfers. A lot of them are good. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because I think I'm a part of this crew as well. For the past 5 years, the transfer portal has been a thing. A lot of us have criticized it. A lot of us have sat back and say we don't like it. A lot of us have said this is changing college sports too much. It's not for good. We're giving athletes too much freedom. We're letting them. It's not amateur sports. It's basically free agency now. But I want to point out something to you that maybe we're not seeing, and I saw it a lot on Saturday. What the transfer portal has done has made the transformation of college football teams and the rebuild of college football teams. Maybe you're just rebuilding a defense. Maybe you're rebuilding everything. It has taken it, it used to be, if you were Tom Allen and you had a terrible defensive line for quite literally the past 3 years, Indiana football has had. Then you had to develop them. This was a 2 to 3 year process at the quickest to turn programs around. Now you can go get somebody who wants out of their current situation, who's looking for a better spot elsewhere, who's looking for a better opportunity elsewhere, and you can bring them into a program and have immediate success. Indiana's defensive line on Saturday was the best Indiana defensive line I've seen. I'm going to be honest, 4 years of Indiana football. 4 years of Indiana football. Saturday's defensive line performance was the best one I've seen. Colorado went 1-11 last year. They just beat the reigning national champs on the road. The transfer portal has given athletes the ability, we talk about the athlete, and yes, it opens up an opportunity for them to showcase their skills. It opens up their opportunity to find better programs. Look at Bo Nix at Auburn. Bo Nix was a professional caliber athlete at Auburn. But then he transfers to Oregon because, let's be honest, Auburn turned on its head. They fired 2 coaches in a span of less than 5 years. Nothing was going right in the program. They didn't have the right players. They didn't have any success. So Bo Nix decides to leave a team he grew up cheering for to go play out west for Oregon, where he's surrounded by talent. Bo Nix looks better. Bo Nix looks like a more professional quarterback. Why? Because he opened that door to a new opportunity and he took it. And let's talk about Oregon. Oh, you think this is only benefiting the players? Oregon was a quarterback away from being national prominent again. They needed a good quarterback who could throw it out to the talent. You don't think this is right with Oregon? Fine. Oregon's always good. Let's talk about Washington with Michael Penix. Michael Penix left Indiana after 4 years, and there's not an Indiana fan on this planet. Let me rephrase that. There's not a logical Indiana fan on this planet who can sit here and tell you that Michael Penix did not make Indiana University a better place for football. Just can't. But Michael Penix kept getting hurt. Indiana had younger guys in the mix. They were ready to move on. Michael Penix was ready to move on. And frankly, after his third injury, no one really knew if Michael Penix was going to be able to play football again. Nobody knew if he was going to be able to go. He went to Washington to be, at best, a backup. That was where they had him slotted when he got there. He was going to be a backup quarterback fighting for the number 2 spot. Now he's in the top 3 Heisman conversation. Why? Because Washington needed a quarterback who could deliver the ball. And Michael Penix could stay healthy behind that offensive line and deliver great passes to these. I mean, he's got 3 wide receivers. All I think are third-round draft picks or better. Look at Bo Nix. Look at Michael Penix. Look at Caleb Williams. Look at Sam Hartman. All have elevated their games to new levels over the past 2 years. Why? Because they were able to find a better situation. And for that reason, their teams are better. So don't sit back here and say the transfer portal is ruining college football, because if anything, it is evening the playing field. Because what the transfer portal has done to college football, it's made it easier for tier 2s to find that one missing piece to get up to tier 1 with Alabama and Georgia. It's made it easier for Alabama and Georgia to fill holes when guys unexpectedly transfer, unexpectedly go to the draft, or unexpectedly change their program to stay at tier 1. And it's made it easier for tiers 5, 4, and 3 to move up without having to take a 2 to 3 year gap in recruiting and development to do so. So those of you sitting back at home today saying the transfer portal's not good, the transfer portal's not good for college football, it's not good for us, I'm telling you, I'm having trouble now looking at this past weekend and probably looking up to this week of college football, sitting back saying, can anyone show me what's wrong with it? It helps coaches. It helps players. Yeah, it stinks that you have to re-recruit your guys every year. But that's more of an NIL issue. If you're a program like Indiana that doesn't have a lot of NIL funds, and you got a player like McCullough last year who was going to make buku money at Oklahoma, yeah, that's tough. But the transfer portal gives you more of ability to replace that talent without having to go re-recruit every single year. So that's my rant. I really think that I encourage you all to watch college football this weekend and look for the transfer portal guys. Look for guys who've only been there a matter of a year or 2 years, and look how they're elevating your team that you're watching. Look how much better your team is because they were added to the program, and I think that might change your perspective a tad. All right, coming up, we have a great sit-down interview with the guy who's the host of the Eyes on Big podcast. He's one of my favorite podcast listens every week. They do this podcast specifically on Big Ten football. Strongly suggest you listen to him. We're going to talk to Jeffrey the Greek about everything surrounding the Big Ten, expansion, Big Ten football this year, what he saw in week 1, what he's excited about for week 2, and how he thinks IU and Purdue will fare going down the strength and busy and tough Big Ten schedule that both those teams have. So without further ado, Jeffrey the Greek right here on the All In Podcast. All right, joining the podcast now, one of the experts, I would say, on the Big Ten Conference, because he is, in my opinion, Joe, I don't know if you would agree with this, the leading Big Ten podcast. There's not a lot out there, but I would go ahead and throw you guys in the mix. Jeffrey the Greek from, of course, Eyes on Big podcast. Jeff, how you doing today, man? Week 1 in the books. Happy to be here.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for the kind words and having me on the podcast. I don't know if we're the first or the best one, Big Ten specific podcast, but we were one of the first ones, so we can at least say that.
I've listened to you guys. I'm a big fan. I've listened to you guys for a couple of years. I think you guys do a great job just rounding out the conference and being able to just put that all out there. So week 1 in the books, what does a week 1 just college football weekend, what did it look like for you? How excited were you to have games back on? Just what was this TV setup, if any?
Yeah. So the TV setup will happen this weekend, and I am ecstatic about that. I guess I'll watch a little NFL football tonight, puke. But college football will be happening on my TV Friday night and all day Saturday. Last weekend, amazing weekend. I went to actually the Minnesota-Nebraska game live. So I was there for the first Big Ten football game of the year. Watched a lot of football Friday night. Saturday, I actually went to the Iowa game, which is always kind of bittersweet for me because I love being back in Kinnick. But at the same time, it's hard to beat just sitting on the couch and always being within arm's reach of your fridge and, your own bathroom. So definitely looking forward to doing that this weekend. And I mean, I love actual Christmas, but opening weekend of college football is my second Christmas.
It felt so good to have good games on too. It felt like it was, I mean, like blowout, sure, but really, there were a lot of good matchups on for a week one where it's usually, sometimes cupcakes. I thought the Minnesota-Nebraska game was as Big Ten football as you can get, but it was kind of exciting.
Yeah.
You had Jeff Sims. I thought it was fun to see Rule out there again. But just kind of an exciting week one in the Big Ten.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe not the cleanest weekend of Big Ten football, that I've ever seen. You hit on it with Nebraska, Minnesota. Was that great defense or not so great offense? It was probably a mix of both, For the big boys, I don't think Michigan showed very much. I think Penn State did exactly what it needed and wanted to do versus West Virginia. Ohio State versus Indiana. Interesting game to me. I told anybody and everybody that I loved your Hoosiers in the 30.5 points in that game. It hit. I felt pretty comfortable about that. Might have made a play with that one in my personal life and investments. So feel pretty good about that. Other than that, a lot of games kind of came out how you would expect them to go.
I know on the Indiana side, at least for the people I talk to who watch Indiana football, especially the past 2 years, they did not want to bet Indiana in that game. So it's good to know that there were people out there who were betting Indiana just to cover against Ohio State, because I know there were a lot of people that weren't. Talk to me about just what did you see in week one that was maybe you were sitting back and you're like, wow, that's actually really surprising. Like for me, I watched the Illinois-Toledo game and I was like, why is that as close as it was? That was big for me. I could not believe that matchup, and I couldn't believe the box score at the end.
Yeah, I tell you what, that's a great start for the most unbelievable game. Not because it was a close game. I think there was a lot of people expecting Toledo, Illinois to be a close game. It was how it looked. That was not the Illinois front seven that we saw all of last year and really at the end of 2021 as well. They were off. They did not look great. So the style of that play is definitely one that surprised me. As far as surprises around the league, I can't say there was a ton. I think it was a lot of you are who we thought you were. Jeff Sims, had been told at his time at Georgia Tech, turn the ball over. Tanner Mordecai, kind of a feast or famine quarterback. That's how he looked versus Buffalo. Some good things, some bad things. Everybody wanted to see how the Wisconsin offense looked like by the end of the game. It kind of reverted back to what Wisconsin's been, leaning on the rushing attack. So I think we're still through week one, certainly until you get into week 2 and 3, we're still learning a lot about these teams. So a fun opening weekend, but we've still got a lot of information gathering that we're doing here.
I think one of the more interesting to hop back to the Indiana Ohio State game. On the Indiana side, I think Indiana fans are like, or should we be happy about this? Should we put up 3 points, but we held the I think Indiana fans are like, is this what optimism feels like?
Yes.
On the Ohio State side, I mean, you would have thought Ohio State lost by 40. I mean, they're freaking out. They don't like the offense. They don't like the defense. Ohio State fans are ones that are very rarely satisfied ever. But
correct.
This one in particular, they didn't see. Did you see that reaction? And what were your big takeaways from how Ohio State fans are feeling?
Yeah, absolutely saw that reaction. In fact, the latest Eyes on Big podcast, when we broke down Ohio State's next opponent, which is Youngstown State, they'll obviously kill them. I talked about how, basically Ohio State fans were in a gigantic cage match all week with each other, fighting each other over what? A 20-point win versus Indiana. And, from what I thought I was going to see coming into the year was an improved Indiana team, at least defensively. I think Tommy Allen does well with pieces if he has the pieces to work with. And I think with, like Andre Carter coming along and a lot of all the new faces, I've dubbed it the Island of Misfit Toys on the defense. I feel like I feel like Tommy has got some things to do here, and then going against some struggling tackles. I'm really kind of all along the offensive line. If you have an attacking defense and an offensive line with Ohio State that struggles, it's going to grind any offense to a halt, let alone one that's starting a brand new quarterback with Ohio State. It just didn't surprise me because, not to pat myself on the back too much, but I put in the work getting to know these teams, and I felt pretty confident about that. If I'm an Indiana fan, I understand you still got beat by 20. I know last year was rough. I get it. But I think there's enough there to feel happy about, especially going into Indiana State. I mean, the funny thing, I don't know if I've ever seen a team go from one side of the talent coin to the other, quite like playing Ohio State one week and Indiana State the second week. So I still don't know how much we will have learned about the Hoosiers even through 2 weeks, but I still think there's enough there to be happy how you played against Ohio State. And my guess is you're going to be pretty happy by the end of the day Saturday because, I think the Hoosiers are going to stomp the Sycamores.
Yeah, I think that's the big. I saw the point spread 34.5 today. I was like, after last week, I'm not sure if this offense can put up 34.5 points. I would like to see that, but last week didn't leave me too hopeful about that. Hey, I want to talk because I know you got a lot of teams you look at. I want to ask you one more kind of individual question before we get into the Big Ten as a whole and the conference and where they're going. But Penn State, you mentioned earlier, they kind of did what they really wanted to do against West Virginia, and that's just kind of dominate, show out. It was close first half, but really came out in the second, and James Franklin, they feel like they finally have what it felt like Penn State was just always a quarterback away. And now they have Drew Aller. They look like they have a solid team. They look like finally they're on the same page with Michigan and Ohio State, not having to play behind them. Do you think this is the year we finally enter Penn State into that big three, like that discussion of, okay, are they finally on the same page with that Michigan, Ohio State? What do they have to do to beat either one of them? And could it be a Penn State Big Ten East year?
I guess my answer is yes to pretty much all those questions. I've dubbed them the Big Three, B1G3. Since the middle of the summer when I really started doing my deep dives. My podcast partner, typically Big Kurt during the off season, he can't do it during the regular season this year, but he picked Penn State to win the Big Ten, go undefeated, 13-0. I picked Penn State to come up just short at 11-1, but beating Ohio State. So yeah, I am convinced this is a complete team. Drew Aller will definitely have to come up with big plays during the big moments of the year. And one would think that would come between, against Ohio State and Michigan, but there'll be another game in there somewhere, right? At Illinois, maybe against Iowa, where, Aller is going to have to come up with some plays. So we'll see, if he can do it. He's still a young quarterback, but if I'm a Penn State fan, I feel pretty confident in what I'm seeing.
Who would you put Aller up there as the best quarterback in the Big Ten right now?
No, I still got to go JJ McCarthy. After that, I feel like it's a mixed bag. Leah Tagovailoa definitely deserves credit. I would put Aller up there. I would put Hudson Card up there. I would put Lukey Legs. He looked great. All of everything that you heard about what Hudson Card looked like, from all the insiders seemed to show out, last weekend. Didn't get the win, obviously, but I think there is a lot of quarterbacks 2 through 5 or 6 that are probably quarterbacks that maybe people aren't quite aware of, but if they watch, they will see talent.
So that's since we're just brought up Hudson Card, let's go ahead and talk about Purdue. People are going to look at the I know IU fans are like, oh my gosh, they lost to Fresno State. People forget that Fresno State won their last 10 games last year, brought in a really good quarterback. They have a great coach who had great years at Cal with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, this is not a bad Fresno State team. I mean, they lost to a non-Power 5 school that is probably going to be in the discussion for a major bowl game in a few months from now. So when you look at Purdue, what'd you think week one? What'd you think of the new head coach? What'd you think of what they're trying to do there? Because to me, I thought the offense looked fantastic for what I was told we were going to get.
Yeah. Not, as far as their defense, it's going to take some time. Okay. I'm not a fan of some of the hires that were made on the defensive side of the ball, but he's a defensive coach, right? So we'll see if Walters can get it figured out. I think he will. I don't know if it's how much is going to happen this year. So if Purdue's going to win some games, which I think they will, it's going to have to be in shootouts, right? And they got the offensive coordinator to do it. They seemingly have the quarterback to do it. So I think that's what I saw. I wonder how many people actually tuned in and watched that game. I mean, Purdue was either tied or ahead of Fresno State the entire first half, had the kickoff return for a touchdown to start the second half. Like, most people that would have watched that game would have thought Purdue was going to win the game pretty much the first, second, and third quarter. Then it just all fell apart. And you see that the first game of a coach's, first part of his tenure. So I don't think it should be all that confusing. I think I would have much rather have seen a much weaker group of 5 team the first game out if I'm Purdue fans and Walters, but I predicted them to go 6-6 winning this game. There's nothing I saw that would make me think that they still can't reach 6-6, but I would say it's going to be a topsy-turvy year for Purdue if they're going to get there.
Well, that schedule is just unbearable. I mean, they got their crossovers, Michigan, amazing. Ohio State, which everyone in the Big Ten East gets that every year. So IU fans don't feel too bad for them. But I mean, even they're at Virginia Tech this weekend. It's not going to get any easier. I mean, Virginia Tech is, I don't think they're ranked, but they're borderline could be ranked. So it's just a interesting schedule for the Boilermakers this year. I mean, there's really not an easy go at it.
No.
There.
No, and I took some heat predicting Purdue to win 6. Certainly, it took a hit not beating Fresno State and most people, that disagreed with me pointed out the schedule. There's no denying that schedule is really, really tough. I would say Virginia Tech might be an easier game for them than Fresno State. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's on the road. It's in Blacksburg. I get it, but it's not a night game. I don't think you're going to get quite the amazing, crazy atmosphere that you typically get with a Vatech, going into Blacksburg like that. Vatech struggle. I mean, they have struggled for quite some time now. Struggled last week to put away an inferior opponent themselves. So we'll see. It also wouldn't surprise me if Purdue lost that game, but I expect Purdue's offense to put pretty decent amount of points up in that game.
Since we're talking Purdue, let's expand to the Big Ten West. I know you got Iowa. You got the Iowa signs in the background. What I love about the Big Ten West is, and a lot of people hate it, what I love about it is I love chaos. And the Big Ten West to me is just anyone's game any year. You're going to come out, you're going to take care of business. This side of the conference can be yours. But if you're not going to, it can really eat you up because it's going to be a great game every week. That being said, this year seems particularly interesting in the sense that there are a lot of question marks with Iowa, and can the offense this is one of the most fun coach watches I think we've ever had, in the sense of we all know what the expectations are for an offensive coordinator in Iowa, and we all are sitting back doing the math in our heads. Okay, wait, so he had 24 last week. He'll have to get to meet these expectations this week. But then you also have a lot of questions about what does fickle football look like in Madison, Wisconsin. And, you know, Matt Rule is a very good coach. He's turned around worse programs than Nebraska in the past. What can he do there in year one? And then you have Purdue that's just going to bother you. If it's a down year, they're still going to bother you. You got Illinois, who was great last year. Bottom line, and Minnesota, who we didn't even get to. So for you, how does the Big Ten West shake out this year? And do you love that aspect of it and the fact that it can be anyone's ball game any year?
I guess for me, last year of the divisions, what I would say is I feel like as a Big Ten fan, if you like watching all Big Ten teams and games, which I do, you've got the best of both worlds. You've got three teams that are elite. All three of these teams, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, have the chance to win the conference and get in the college football playoff and make some noise. So you got that side of it. Then on the other side, you might go, 6 teams deep into the division. So now you got that side that doesn't have an elite team, but it's got the fun, lovable chaos. So I feel like both are yearned for from college football fans, either, competitiveness or eliteness. The Big Ten's got both, and it's split off into 2 divisions. So to me, I think it's set up perfectly to watch it as a fan. As far as, in the Big Ten West, who I'm looking for, it's certainly not Northwestern. Okay. I'm not sure if they're going to win a game this year. So you pretty much just, throw them off to the side and then look up from there. Tough for me to see Nebraska making a lot of noise first year with Rule, and Minnesota, tough for me to see there because of their schedule and new faces. Kind of the same thing with Purdue, schedule and new faces. But Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, those to me are the 3, best teams in the division. I feel like it'll come out of one of those 3 teams. But like I said, Illinois shook my confidence last week because their defense struggled so much.
I think it's a very, I picked, I'm going to be honest, I picked Iowa to win the division.
Okay.
I thought there were a lot of questions with Fickell, and I thought, I'm not sure if Fickell's ready for 12 games back to back of real football. Meaning you're not going to get that, not saying ace,
good point.
Not saying he wasn't getting that, but just saying, he did get a, not a cupcake, but he did get a lighter opponent sometimes. He wasn't playing Northwestern or Indiana, who was at the bottom of the conference, but still had legit Big Ten skill set.
Right. Yep.
And so I'm kind of excited to see what that looks like. And I think what Iowa has is, the defense is going to be good in a conference where defense still really matters. And I think people like to poke fun at the offensive numbers and the contract and all that. I don't know if there's any greater motivator in sports than everyone knows what the I thought it was, I've had mixed feelings when they did it. And then I was like, gosh, is there a better motivator as an offensive coordinator to know that everybody knows what the expectation is, and every single game you are getting asked to meet those expectations? I just thought it was a smart move by Iowa's standpoint. But besides the point, I just think they have.
Now, the one thing, if I could interject, the one thing is it's not just about the points per game. So if he finishes averaging 24.99 points per game, he doesn't automatically get fired. It's a points per game and an accelerator on it for how many games the team wins. So they have to drop below 7 wins. What's that?
Did you like that when they announced it, or were you like, I don't, or did you want him kind of gone?
I want the offense to look better. I'll say that. And if it takes Brian Ferentz being gone, so be it. Right. I certainly wasn't one that thought everything that happened last year was Brian Ferentz's fault. But ultimately, if you're the one driving the bus and it runs off the hill, you got to take some ownership for it. We had massive issues on the offensive line with injuries and guys retiring and medically having issues. Our wide receiver room was absolutely decimated. And then suddenly you have a statuesque quarterback behind an offensive line that can't pass protect, throwing to wide receivers that can't get open. I mean, that's how it went down. So they went out
Indiana
and
offense for the past like 5-6 years, but yeah.
I mean,
so I get it.
I mean, you need competent offensive line. It doesn't have to be elite, but you need competent offensive line play, especially with the pass pro, in order to run a basic offense. And Iowa just did not have that this year. So, I mean, to me, the bigger thing was going out and getting Cade McNamara, going out and getting 2 or 3 difference makers at receiver and a couple guys to plug in to the offensive line. The passing game already looked better last week, not great. They wanted to work on the rushing attack, you could tell, after they got a couple touchdowns on the board. But to me, if you look at Brian Ferentz's tenure, he wasn't the offensive coordinator just the last 2 years. I think this is his 6th year. The offense did look better the previous 3 years before the last couple, horrible ones. And I would say one of the bigger differences was he had better pieces to work with in 18, 19, and 20. So, still young, right? I mean, it looked a little bit better. The rushing attack and blocking along the offensive line has got to be better, and I hope it happens this weekend. But I don't think the Iowa players and coaches are thinking about the points per game thing nearly as much as Twitter and the media is. That's my take.
Right. I think it's also a national media thing because it was just so different for it to make that so public.
Yeah.
And that was the other thing that I thought was interesting is that they chose to make it public because usually, I mean, from an Indiana standpoint, from a Louisville standpoint, from a UK, a lot of that stuff's kept inside the coach's room, inside the locker room, inside the athletic director's office. Those expectations are made, but they're very rarely shared with the media, with the national media, with fans. So the fans and the media also know what the expectations are. But it almost felt like if there was not a move made there in Iowa, there had to be an explanation as to, well, there's not going to be a move, but here's why.
Right. And that's pretty much what it was. Yep.
That's why I thought it was interesting because I haven't seen that done before. It's like, hey, we're not making a move, but we're laying out we hear you, and here's the expectation, which I thought it was.
Yep.
Truth be told, I thought it was refreshing to know that the fans' voices were heard and we're acknowledging it. We're not choosing to answer a lot of you, but this is how we're going to address it.
And I think a lot of Iowa fans think to themselves, he could have wrote it on a piece of paper and handed it to Kirk and Brian Ferentz and just said, this is what I'm looking for. Otherwise, you're gone. But it was made public. And then pretty quickly after that, the athletic director, Gary Barta, took off. He retired. So, make of that what you will. Because now we have a new interim athletic director. And if she is the permanent athletic director, my guess is she has the ability to tear up that contract and that, what was thrown out there, it's going to be up to her, so This thing isn't done yet. I kind of think, I could be wrong, but as the season goes on, people will just lose interest in it, as upsets start to happen and the races get interesting. I don't know how much people are actually going to pay that close to attention to it. All right. We're okay. Right. The answer is both. I mean, it's a great question that you asked. The proud part, with hanging in there with the SEC. Personally, it depends on how far back you want to go to who's to blame for all of this. I would sure like to put a lot of blame on Texas. They're not really ever worrying about anything other than themselves, and I know that's a common trait these days. But I feel like once they made that change to go to the SEC, I'm not sure if the Big Ten had to do something, but it was sure expected that they would do something. And getting USC and UCLA right out of the bat, I mean, that was huge. I do think it was the right move after that to bring in Wash and Oregon because you need a little bit more regionality for those two teams. And as far as how I feel, listen, I'm going to watch these games. At some point, Iowa's going to be playing, at the zoo. I'm going to go out there and check it out. I would love to do sailgating, before a Washington game. I'm going to watch these games on TV. I'm going to watch the games, but there's always going to be a part of me that's going to feel icky knowing that, the real Big Ten is Iowa versus Michigan, Indiana, Purdue, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Like that is, the Big Ten conference to me. I throw Penn State in there too. I mean, I've pretty much only known Penn State in the Big Ten. So like, that's how I would see it. But we're all going to watch. We're all going to enjoy. We're going to check out the lines before these games and big, we adjust. I hope that there will remain at least 4 major conferences, or 2 and 2 or however it is. I don't want to see it just be the Big Ten and the SEC because that's too NFL like. So that's my last shred of hope is that, more of these conferences survive and make enough money that they don't just implode. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. It doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. Does not make sense to me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 Mm-hmm. Right. And you watch, I've got young kids. I've got a 5 and, almost 8-year old. Probably by the time they're in their 40s or something like that, this will have all switched back. People will probably come to their senses and say there's not enough money here to support this, and these sports should be more regional to make more sense for players, coaches, and fans to get to. we'll see. Like people always assume these things are ironclad and going to be there forever. I'm not so sure about that. There will be adjustments, and people that I would hope are smarter about me than how this is all going to work out. We'll figure out a way. For me, I mostly worry about football, then a little bit basketball and wrestling. But I think those sports will mostly be fine, but going to be some adjustments, no doubt about it. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I still would have to put the SEC first. They hold the title 2 in a row now for Georgia. Obviously, Alabama's been dominant, but I am starting to believe that one of the advantages that the SEC has had, that I believe they've had, is starting to erode away, which is they've been paying their players like crazy for 30, 40 years. Okay. Now everybody's paying their players. So, and I think it's going to start eroding the talent. These top quarterbacks don't have to sit in the SEC. They can move around, these quarterbacks. And I think that's going to, as much as I maybe wasn't the biggest proponent of the transfer portal, you are now seeing quarterbacks. I mean, obviously Hudson Card at Purdue is a perfect example. He didn't have to sit in Texas. He can now go into Purdue, and now that instantly makes Purdue a better football team. So I think all of these things and the spreading out of the talent is going to water down the SEC and bring them down to the rest of the country. Now the SEC and the Big Ten are still going to be swinging the biggest sticks, and we'll have the best teams. But we saw the SEC take it on the chin last weekend. Florida just got boat raced by Utah. That game could have been way worse. Florida State absolutely took it to LSU. I mean, people thought LSU could have been, the fourth or fifth best team in the country. South Carolina getting, destroyed by North Carolina. I mean, I don't think these things necessarily happened 2-3 years ago. So hoping that means the SEC is coming down a little bit. I think the Big Ten has remained very consistent. Very tough, way more stout teams 3 through 10 than I think people realize, and which I think will make a really interesting Big Ten throughout this year. That's crazy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. Yeah. Yep. We agree. Yeah. Yeah, nothing really that I saw last weekend changed my mind. In fact, I would say reinforced a lot of my thoughts. I had also Iowa winning the Big Ten West. I had Michigan winning the Big Ten East and Michigan winning it all. So nothing I've seen out of Michigan. They might not be quite as stellar along the offensive line as they were the last 2 years. So I think that's something that they're going to have to adjust to, which is fine because I think JJ McCarthy will be that good. Penn State, though, I also have getting into the playoffs. If Penn State goes 11-1, like I predict, with their only loss being to a 13-0 Michigan team, that definitely puts them in the running for the third or fourth spot. I would say LSU getting beat up pretty bad by Florida State might actually be a good thing for like a Penn State or the number 2, Big Ten team. But obviously we got to see how things shake out more and more as the year goes on. Maybe Florida State, solidifies their spot because of a win like that. So yeah, nothing I've seen has really changed what I predicted late August and in the offseason. But one key injury here or one upset there, and things can change pretty quick in this sport. Yeah. I predicted them 5-7, and there's iterations of when I go through these predictions and a process I go through. There's some I had as low as 4-8, and there's some that I had as high as 6-6 and going to a bowl. So I kind of settled in the middle there with 5-7. I think everybody expected them to be 1-1 after the first 2 games. I mean, it's going down essentially how you thought it would go. That third game versus Louisville, that's going to be a big one right there. I think Indiana can do it. Okay. Louisville did not look great their first game. I mean, they pulled out the win. It was a typical Jeff Brom, stubborn, pulling out a win at the end. I don't know how he does it half the time. But I don't think it's a Louisville team that's like unbeatable, for Indiana. So you win that game, season on right there to get, for a drive for 6 games. You very realistically would be 3-1 at that point, and then have Maryland coming up that game. So like, those are the 2 games right there. Louisville and Maryland, that 5th game. Maryland is not unbeatable. They've got some issues along the lines. So we'll see. I mean, Indiana is a team that has interested me ever since I did the deep dive on them. Sometimes I feel like I might be more into Indiana football than some Hoosier fans. But we will see. I am very interested to see how they get through September. Good. Yeah, pretty much anywhere you go, Spotify. Spotify is usually fine. I guess we've been having a little bit of audio issues there, but for the most part, we're fine. But Apple, Android, any of the places that you can essentially, on a website, you can download, just look up the Eyes on Big. That's EYES on B1G. Follow me on Twitter, if you will, at Jeffrey the Greek, JEFFREY the Greek. Big Kurt's on Twitter too. My new podcast partner Jordan also on Twitter. All 14 teams. We're going to break down every game. We've already broke down all 14 games this weekend with spreads and lines and totals. Then we'll break down each game every Sunday, recapping what we have. So 2 pods a week through the rest of the season. It's a lot of fun, and love interacting with people on Twitter, whether or not they're happy with our predictions or not. Double G, thanks for having me on.
All right, that was Jeff the Greek. You can follow him on Twitter. You can find his podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's Eyes on Big. I strongly suggest you listen to that after listening to this. They do a great job previewing week 2. Thanks so much for joining us on the All In podcast today. Quick reminder, be sure to leave us those voice messages. I'd love to be able to start using those in episodes starting next week. They can be about anything. They could be a question, a thought, a comment. It doesn't even have to be sports related. If you just feel like throwing something out there, throw something out there. We'll see if I play it. But as always, thanks y'all for listening. We appreciate it. New episode coming out in less than 24 hours after this one. Colts football preview with James Boyd from The Athletics. So that will be a lot of fun to talk to him about what the Colts are going to do this year. So be on the lookout for that one. Be kind to each other. Stay nice out there. Have a great weekend, y'all. We'll see you later on the All In Podcast.